Chapter 28. You are listening at Novel Full. Audio. The sachet. The wind of this night was particularly violent. When it was in the middle of the night, it began to rain. The raindrops hit the window and the plantain in the yard, making miserable sounds. Xu Huan's sleep had always been good. She belonged to the kind of person that would fall asleep very quickly when her head touched the pillow. However, tonight she didn't know whether it was because the rain was too heavy or that the porcelain pillow underneath her head was too hard. In short, no matter how she slept, it felt uncomfortable. She turned around for the whole night. When the sky got a bit light, she couldn't lie down anymore. She quietly rolled out of bed and pushed the window open. Fresh air with drops of water immediately blew in and reduced her tiredness and sleepiness by half. Xu Huan then propped up her chin at the window and stared at the lotus pond outside. The raindrops dripped down the leak. From time to time, they would fall into the tank and frighten some red dragonflies. She was just starting to find it interesting, when she suddenly felt something heavy on her shoulder. She turned and saw that Gu Shiran had gotten up and put a coat on her shoulder. "Where did you go last night?" Xu Huan moved her eyes away. "Didn't go anywhere. Just took a walk in the residence." Gu Shiran frowned slightly. Suddenly, he pulled her sleeve and sniffed. "What kind of scent is this?" Xu Huan laughed, pulled back her sleeve and answered, "I don't understand about fragrances." "You ask me, how would I know? Presumably, it's the fragrance that concubine Yun burned yesterday. It was sweet and pleasing to smell, but I also don't know the name of that fragrance." Yun Yen. Gu Shiran raised an eyebrow with an expression of wanting to say something but hesitated. He walked to the incense burner and looked at it. He shook his head and said, "It's not this scent." Xu Huan was surprised. She took 2 deep breaths. Suddenly she remembered that this was the scent of wonderful redwood of Inga. It was cool and elegant and not something other fragrances could mask. No wonder there was a quote that was called "redwood perfume to dye clothes." The two just said a few words when they were interrupted by a maid. After they washed up, Xu Huan went to old Madam's to pay her respects in the rain. This was a rule that even thunder couldn't break, not to mention rain. Even if it was snowing or knives pouring down, she couldn't not go. However, the mood of walking slowly in the rain with a paper umbrella was very classical. It was just that they didn't have shoes for the rain. The embroidered shoes were soaked and felt uncomfortable. Old Madam had probably become accustomed to her early retreat. Plus, the fact that recently there wasn't any news that Gu Shiran's illness got worse, so she probably thought that this granddaughter-in-law wasn't too unlucky. Hence, she turned a blind eye and wasn't as stern as before. Therefore, after she paid her respect and had breakfast with old Madam, she came out of Pine Crane Hall. The surprise was that when she walked to the entrance, she was called by Gu Third Miss Gu Xian. She timidly handed her a pair of shoes and said in a low voice, "Tomorrow is second big brother's birthday. I think that he presumably doesn't want people to go bother him because he needs to take care of his health. I need to bother second sister-in-law to give these shoes for him. It's my kind feelings for him." Xu Huan took over the shoes and looked at them. She saw that the stitches were meticulous and well shaped. Although, she didn't know embroidery, but she could see that this was done with the heart. She couldn't help but thank her in Gu Shiran's stead and laughed, "If you have free time tomorrow, you can come over for a while. Your second big brother is already bored from taking care of his health. If he had someone to talk to, his mood will turn brighter." Gu Xian accepted with lowered head. Then, she didn't spoke anymore. She could see that this little girl was shy and introverted. Xu Huan didn't take her for a chat. After saying goodbye, she went straight to Plum Flower Pavilion. When she returned to the yard, she explained the matter of the shoes to Gu Shiran. After that, she went to concubine Yun's west chamber for the first time. She also had no other way. Ever since young, only her parents celebrated birthdays with her. She had never planned a birthday for another. She had to ask concubine Yun how to do it to avoid that there are some cumbersome rules that she didn't know about and to avoid doing a bad thing with good intentions. Concubine Yun seemed to be very leisure. She smiled, second young mistress doesn't have to worry about this matter. In the past, on this day, old madam would send a festive dinner over. The other yards would also send some things. However, they knew that second young master was ill and likes it to be quiet, so most of them didn't come to visit. Those who came would just accompany second young master to eat some bites and sat for a while. You can just let the maids prepare some good tea and treats. It seemed that there was nothing for her to do. Xu Huan said that she got it and wanted to leave. She didn't expect that concubine called her to stop her from leaving. She said with hesitation, second young mistress, please give me a moment. Yen has something to say. What? Concubine looked at the maid at her side Xiangqian. Xiangqian very tactfully said that she was going to get tea and went out. Liangqian and Meijing also knew the rules. They also went out and even closed the door for them. Xu Huan felt somewhat uncomfortable with this situation. It was so secretive that she felt there was some conspiracy, making her couldn't help but to be vigilant. Concubine Yun was also not in a hurry to talk. She first invited her to take a seat. She added incense to the incense burner. After that she picked up the tea. Then, she hesitantly pulled a sachet from her sleeve, put it on the table and gently pushed it to her, sh. What is this? Xu Huan frowned. She picked up the sachet and looked at it. The birthday gift you want to give second young master. Although, she asked, she herself felt that it doesn't seem to be the case. There was a pair of mandarin ducks playing in the water embroidered on the sachet. The embroidery method was very fine, but the material used was obviously rough material. It seemed to be made from those cheap red cloth. Concubine Yun would never give this kind of thing to Gu Shiran. Also, even if she wanted to give it, she would certainly not let her, give it instead. Concubine Yun was somewhat puzzled at her reaction. She lowered her voice and said, second young mistress, look once again at it. Do you really not recognize this thing? This was strange. Should she have recognized it? Xu Huan didn't have the patience to play riddles with her and put the sachet on the table. She said, I've never seen it before. Concubine Yun didn't spoke. Her gaze just fixed on her, face. Concubine Yun never had this kind of behavior before. Usually, she always avoided Xu Huan's gaze and tried not to look at her, eyes. Therefore, Xu Huan became more puzzled, if you have something to say, just be more direct. Only now did concubine Yun lower her gaze and smiled slightly, it's me who was rude, second young mistress. While talking, she picked up that sachet and said faintly, I sent people to buy this sachet from a young scholar for 5 silver liang. This scholar happened to be a close neighbor of you before you married. The one who taught you to read. Speaking till here, she paused. She raised her eyes and looked at Xu Huan. Now, did second young mistress remember something? Mandarin ducks playing in the water embroidery, young scholar, close neighbor, taught to read. When these clues were put together, even if Xu Huan was very stupid, she could guess the origin of the sachet. This sachet must have been personally embroidered by the original owner. She, didn't know whether she wanted to express her feelings or her gratitude to give such an amorous thing to that scholar. Perhaps it was given before she married. No wonder concubine Yun bought it so eagerly. The question was naturally why it was so coincidentally. She said that an old scholar taught her how to read. Suddenly, a young scholar appeared that received a sachet from the original owner. Was it a sham? Unlikely. Concubine Yun didn't know that she wasn't the original owner. What was the use of using a sham to muddle her, BVEC? What made her more dejected was Huiyun. When she said that she had learned to read from an old scholar, she had only said that to Huiyun. She didn't know whether it was because the walls have ears or that Huiyun said it inadvertently or intentionally. While the room was silent, concubine Yun said, "Second young mistress remembered. This is a sachet you personally embroidered. You shouldn't not recognize it. Besides, Madame.in.law told me that you studied 2 years with that scholar." This was meant to threaten her. Chapter 29. You are listening at novelfull.audio. To sympathize. Ever since she time-traveled to now, Xu Huan had always tried to avoid concubine Yun when she could. She'd never had a face-to-face dispute with her. Firstly, this was because she had no intention of fighting for anything with her. Secondly was because she was a newcomer and didn't want to make enemies everywhere she went. However, at this moment, concubine Yun completely broke the balance of not fighting between the wife and the concubines. Xu Huan could pretend that she didn't know about what was happening behind her back and wouldn't pursue the matter. However, being threatened in her face and still be a yes-man, she couldn't do it. Thinking till here, she stood up and said coldly, "Concubine made me stay just for this." After getting used to seeing Xu Huan's laid-back temper and seeing her cold eyes now, concubine Yun also couldn't help but feel slightly stunned. For a moment, she didn't know what to answer. Xu Huan naturally didn't have the patience anymore to stay. "Since you have nothing to say, I still have things to do. I will leave first." When she said that she was leaving, she was truly leaving. She was already at the door, when concubine Yun called her, "Second young mistress, you are not afraid that this sachet—" She hadn't finished speaking when Xu Huan turned with a slight smile. "What? You want to threaten me? Do you want to show this sachet to your second young master, or is it that you want to publicize this matter so that everyone will get to know about it?" Xu Huan's reaction was beyond concubine Yun's expectations. She bit her lips when her threat didn't work. Suddenly she knelt. "Second young mistress has misunderstood. I have no such intention. I bought this sachet because I was afraid that others would get to know about this matter. Don't worry, I will guard my mouth like a closed bottle on this matter and will not spread it." "Really?" Xu Huan raised an eyebrow. "Then, how should I thank you?" Concubine Yun lowered her head and said, "Yen knows Yan's identity. Yen has never had other intentions. I only want to have a place in Gu household. It was just that second young master doesn't like me now. I thought for a long while and didn't seem to have ever offended second young master. If I have unintentionally collided with second young mistress, I ask second young mistress to have mercy and spare me this time. From now on, I will double my self-discipline and will never stir up trouble again. I ask second young mistress to fulfill this wish of mine." This was still a threat in disguise. Xu Huan said in a laughable tone, "You are suspicious that I sowed dissension between you and second young master." Concubine Yun lowered her voice, "Yen doesn't dare. Is it that you don't dare or haven't suspected?" Xu Huan was very tired of this. "If you have something to say, can't you just say it directly? I don't have such a clever heart like yours and also doesn't want to go around guessing your thoughts. However, I will tell you clearly that if Gu Shiran dislike you, it's his matter. It has nothing to do with me. If you feel wronged, then you can go cry at his place. What use does it have to tell me? Could it be that you want me to drag him to your bed?" Concubine Yun didn't expect that she would be so blunt. Her face immediately paled. Tears rolled down her eyes and said, "Second young mistress, don't get angry. It wasn't Yan's intention to do such a despicable thing as to hold on to information that could be used against you. It was just, that as a concubine, if I can't get second young master's heart and also doesn't have an offspring, it would be very difficult to have a stand in Gu household. Second young master, second young master. To put it bluntly, this is something between you and him. You want to please him and give birth to his child, then go think of ways to be entangled with him. What's the use of bothering me?" While Xu Huan talked, she picked up the sachet from the table and put it in front of her. "Why, even if you went with this sachet to report to old madam, at most, she will get angry and let Gu Shiran divorce me. Will anything good come from my divorce for you? Another second young mistress will be taken in. Perhaps, also 2 concubines. If he dislikes you, he will still dislike you. Concubine Yun didn't speak. She only sat on the ground and shed tears. Xu Huan threw the sachet in front of her. Your situation deserves sympathy, but your actions are hateful. If you want to have a ground to stand on, you don't have to use me as a stepping stone. I don't have the habit of sacrificing myself to support others, and I also don't like to be a matchmaker who link red strings for people. Also, don't say that I don't recognize this sachet. Even if you think that this thing is useful and spread the matter to smear Gu household's face, then the first one who would be unlucky wouldn't be me, but you. Go think about what to do yourself. After having said that, she looked once more at concubine Yun, who cried like raindrops on a pear blossom. She, felt very dejected in her heart. It was obviously she who had been bullied. Why was the other party crying more pitiful than her? In other words, no matter how miserable concubine Yun's situation was, could it be more miserable than hers? She haven't even cried yet and the other party already started crying. She sighed, turned around and was about to open the door, but unexpectedly, her hand had just touched the doorknob when she heard 3 knocks from the other side of the door. Concubine Yun. The voice just fell, when the door was pushed open. The one who entered was Hui Yun with a perturbed face. When she saw the situation in the room, she was startled at first. Then, she was at a loss about what to do. Xu Huan frowned. What is the matter? No. Nothing. Huiyan stole a glance at concubine Yun, who had her head lowered, trying to wipe her tears. She, said in a low voice. This slave passed by and heard the cries inside. So, I came in to see what was the matter. At this time, concubine Yun stood up from the ground. While she stuffed that sachet in her sleeve, she tried to force a smile. I came in from the outside and didn't expect that there was mud on my soles. I slipped and fell. It's nothing. You can retreat. The floor in the room was very dry. There was obviously no wet mud. She obviously looked for an excuse to cover up the matter. However, originally, she didn't have to explain to a maid, so Huiyun naturally didn't dare to ask more. She lowered her head and said, yes. She retreated. Seeing that she went away, concubine Yun bowed slightly and paid her respect to Xu Huan, second young mistress. I apologize for just now. Xu Huan saw that her face showed embarrassment and sorrow. She couldn't help but shake her head. She didn't say anything, turned and left. In fact, concubine Yun could be considered an obedient person. At least, she appeared to be low-key and cautious. Aside from liking Gu Shiran and wanting to be by his side, she didn't have other intentions. If it was another with a more brash personality, not only would it be a life and death struggle, she would also spread the things that the original owner had done before. At this time, she may have to kneel at old madam's for trial. She got annoyed just by thinking about it. How many things about the original owner did she still not know? It felt like a bomb. Perhaps, sometime that bomb would start ticking. Something was not right. When she was in front of the door of the main chamber, she suddenly stopped. Gu Shiran seemed to know the original owner very well. Then, did he know about this sachet? If he didn't know, then forget it. If he knew, why didn't he mention it? Xu Huan had a strange feeling in her heart that she couldn't describe nor touch. While she was in deep thoughts, she suddenly felt an arm around her waist. Then, her right shoulder sank a bit. Someone's chin was on it. She didn't have to guess and knew that this person must be Gu Shiran. Lately, he had become more presumptuous and did more intimate actions. She had blocked him once or twice, but she couldn't block the third and fourth time. Thinking till here, she felt somewhat helpless. While Gu Shiran went into the room with her with his arm around her waist, he asked, "What were you thinking about?" Xu Huan avoided answering him. She only looked at him. She saw that he was carrying an umbrella in one hand. His clothes also had signs of being rained on. She couldn't help but ask, "You went out just now?" There was no sun to bask into." "I went out for a walk. I just returned and saw you standing deep in thoughts in front of the door." Hearing him say this, Shu Huan was slightly relieved. Fortunately, he didn't hear her dispute with concubine Yun. It was not that she was afraid. It was just that she had too much things to worry about. If one or two more were added, it would almost reach the limit that she could bear. Chapter 30. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The summoning in this rainy weather, the most pleasant thing was nothing more than not having to go out and be lazy at home. Shu Huan was very content at the moment. After taking a bath and with her hair wet, she sat under the eave and watched the rain. The ancient life was exquisite and graceful. In all respects, it was an artistic mood. If it wasn't because of those troubles and concerns about her future and the longing for her parents and friends, she would have liked it here. Huiyun came in with tea and reported, "Second young mistress, those pets raised by fourth young master had been moved to the penthouse. I let the maids clean up east chamber and also opened the windows for fresh air. Then, they will burn fragrances to dispel the smell." Shu Huan looked once at her, took over the tea and responded casually, "Good." Huiyun handled the affairs in a proper way. She didn't have to worry. She took advantage of Gu Shiran's nap time to vacate the east chamber. Even if she still had to sleep in the main chamber at night, she would keep that chamber in case she wanted some time alone. Shu Huan took a sip of tea and said, "Did you tell anybody that an old teacher taught me how to read?" Huiyun lowered her head and said, "That day when this slave went to get the books for you, concubine Yun asked about it. This slave knows the rules. This slave only said that second young mistress wanted books and didn't dare to say anything else." Shu Huan nodded and didn't say anything more. Forget it, she also didn't want to pursue it. Anyway, if concubine Yun didn't get the news from Huiyun, then it would be from those parents of the original owner. The chance of the latter was more likely. After all, as long as she sees benefit, with that character of Su Shi, she would be willing to say anything. If the original owner really learned to read from that scholar, it wouldn't be something difficult to find out. She didn't grow up in the struggle of a household since young, so she didn't have many opportunities to fight with others. Besides, one couldn't guard against everything. She could only be more cautious and try not to let others get information that could be used against her. The rest of the matter was counter soldiers with arms, water with an earth weir. Wait and see. The most important thing about living was to be happy and to live every moment well. If she had to ponder every day about those schemes and make herself a dark-hearted person, it was better for her to die. The rain fell all day and only stopped a bit when it was time to put the lights on. The clouds were gone, and the air was clear and cooling. At the time of dinner, Gu Shiha rushed in like an out-of-control horse and shouted, "Get rice for me. I'm starving." Concubine Yun quickly called people to add a bowl and chopsticks. Gu Shiran had just picked up the chopsticks when he was surprised by this sight. "Didn't you always eat with old madam?" "Don't mention it." Gu Shiha waved with his hand. That face of old madam was like the weather outside. It was gloomy for the whole afternoon. Even when I teased her, she didn't laugh and even drove me out to play elsewhere. When he finished talking, he sat down and looked at the dishes on the table. That face immediately became a bitter melon. "This can't be. Madam is abstaining from eating meat today." The whole table was full of vegetables. "I don't like to eat that. That was why I rushed to here." "How come you are also abstaining from eating meat? There are two non-vegetarian dishes." While Shu Huan talked, she moved the dish to him. "You can eat this." Gu Shiha obviously had no interest in the two dishes. However, after playing for a whole day, he was hungry. So, he could only put up with it and eat. While eating, he complained that the dishes didn't have much taste. It seemed that he liked those oily and thick, sauced intense flavors. After he ate for a while and his speed slowed down, Gu Shiran picked up a dish for him and asked, "Is it that you made old madam angry?" "Me." Gu Shiha didn't even raise his head and said, "Old madam had never been angry with me." What he said was the truth. Even if he caused a big trouble and angered Master Gu, old madam would smile and say that he was still young, didn't know anything and that being playful was a good thing because like that he would grow up smartly. In order to avoid touching a sore subject tomorrow when she went to pay her respects, Shu Huan asked, then, why was she not in a good mood? Gu Shiha rolled his eyes at her, how would I know? When I asked her, she didn't tell me and only let me be quiet. It seemed that she wouldn't get anything out from Gu Shiha's mouth. She knew that old madam was very angry. It didn't seem to be a trivial matter. After they ate, concubine Yun brought tea. Gu Shiha was someone who liked to move. How could he sit idly? He pestered Shu Huan and quietly asked her how the carving of the wonderful redwood of Inga was going. Shu Huan felt like laughing when she recalled that rogue rabbit. Just when she wanted to pull him to the study to show him, she didn't expect that old madam's maid Zisu, who was in charge of delivering things, came over. After she paid her respect, she said, "Old madam asked second young mistress and concubine Yun to go over to play leaf card." Leaf card. She didn't know how to play at all. However, when she thought about, she couldn't help but become suspicious. Wasn't old madam angry? How come she thought about playing cards? What's more, that she had always disliked her, sh. If there weren't enough people to play cards with, she could just call those concubines or maids. Why did she had to call her and concubine Yun? It couldn't be. While she was in deep thoughts, she sneaked a glance at concubine Yun. She just happened to meet that confused and perturbed gaze of concubine Yun. Gu Shiran was also surprised for a moment. Then, he gave Gu Shiha a meaningful glance. The little brat was very clever. He got from the chair and pulled Shu Huan. "Let's go together. No matter who wins, they have to give a percentage of the winnings to me." Zisu quickly stopped him and said, "Fourth young master, old madam had already said to only call second young mistress and concubine Yun. They don't even have to bring the maids." When had Gu Shiha received such cold treatment? He immediately got angry, raised his foot to kick her, utter rubbish. When had I ever been stopped when going to old madam's? You don't let me go when it was just playing cards. Gu Shiran quickly stopped him. Zisu had been kicked very painfully. She felt really wronged and said with tears, "Fourth young master, this is what old madam ordered. Otherwise, even if you give this slave 10 guts, this slave wouldn't dare to stop you." Gu Shiha refused to give in. He still wanted to refute but was taken aside by Gu Shiran. Hence, he could only give up. Shu Huan already understood that this card playing was a pretense. There was absolutely something going on for her to call them. Besides, the thing was not small and was related to the old madam's anger. It was just, during this time, she knew her place and didn't do anything. She really didn't do anything bad like killing or setting the house on fire. The only matter that could make old madam angry was the matter that concubine Yun told her about in the morning. She raised her eyes and looked at concubine Yun. The other party was also looking at her. That eager to explain expression didn't seem fake. She couldn't help but shook her head and sigh. She said to Zisu, "Let's go." No matter what it was, she couldn't not go after already having been called. It would be clear when she gets there whether it was a curse or a blessing. If it was a curse, she couldn't escape. Zisu quickly lit the lantern to light the road and led them out. Gu Shiran was silent for a moment. Then, he looked at Gu Shiha who was still angry because he lost favor. He suddenly laughed, "How about we play a game? Who has the mood to play?" Gu Shiran's eyes shone like stars in the light, "It's very interesting." Gu Shiha compromised because of interest, "All right. Tell me how to play. I'm the great General." You are the spy of the army. Gu Shiha's eyes widened and waited for him to continue. Who would have thought that Gu Shiran would say the next word, go? Gu Shiha was a little confused. Where to? Go to old madam to spy for information. Ah! Only now did Gu Shiha understood and said angrily, if you want me to go inquire, just say it. What's there to pretend with games? Although, he said that, he was also curious. He didn't know why old madam called Shu Huan and concubine Yun. Why was it so mysterious and also didn't allow him to follow? Thinking till here, he said resentfully, all right, I will go take a look for you. Gu Shiran raised an eyebrow and smiled, remember to do it cautiously and secretly. Don't let people catch you. That being mentioned made Gu Shiha felt that playing this game at night was quite the right feel. He immediately got the impulse and said, Great. General, this small soldier will go now. After having said that, he turned and ran to outside. Chapter 31 You are listening at novelfull.audio. Opposing each other with equal harshness. It was fine weather after the rain. The moonlight was clear like water. No one was in the mood to talk. All the way, the three were quiet. Only the soft sound of the embroidered shoes moving on the wet stones could be heard. Only when they stepped in the yard of Pine Crane Hall did Zissou turn and locked the main door. Then, she went in first to report. Following this, concubine Yun whispered, second young mistress, it's really not me. Shu Huan turned and looked at her. Her face was pale like the moonlight. There was grievance in her eyes as well as confusion and helplessness. I know it's not you. When people do good things, they often rely on their own heart. When they do bad things, it was for the sake of interest. Only when concubine Yun hold on that information that can be used against her, and threaten her would it be beneficial for her. Why? If the information gets out, both sides would lose. This was also why both of them would be here now. It was just, did concubine Yun know that when she schemed against someone, she could also be schemed against? The one who was unlucky was her, She didn't do anything, but was still struck by the arrow. Shu Huan sighed and asked, what did my parents tell you exactly? Concubine Yun shook her head and said, they didn't say anything. I just asked them whether second young mistress knows how to read. They said that you learned from that scholar. I let someone inquire about the other things. Aside from the sachet, there was nothing else. Shu Huan's heart slightly calmed down. She lifted her skirt and walked up the steps. When things came to a head, she wasn't afraid anymore. After all, even if she was afraid, it wouldn't help the matter. It was just the mantis stalks the cicada, unaware of the oriole behind. Concubine Yun was the mantis. Then, who was the oriole? When the two entered the main hall, they saw old madam sitting on the main seat with a sullen face. That expression was even more ugly than how Gu Shiha described it. Shu Huan stepped forward and paid her respect, greetings to old madam. Old madam humphed once coldly and shouted, everyone retreat. No one is allowed to stay in the room. Yes, Zissou and the other maids responded. Everyone retreated unsettled and closed the door. Old madam personally walked to the door and locked it. Then, her gaze swept over Shu Huan and concubine Yun. She shouted, kneel. The voice was like thunder, making concubine Yun tremble and kneel first. Shu Huan lifted her clothes a bit and also knelt. Old madam then walked back and sat down. She just looked at them gloomily like this without a word. Shu Huan didn't know how much time had passed, when she finally heard old madam say, where is the sachet? Still not handing it over. Sure enough, it was for this matter. Although, she was prepared, Shu Huan's eyelids still jumped. She got a headache from guessing how many eyes and ears were placed at her side. Or better said, inside of Plum Flower Pavilion. Concubine Yun's body trembled once more. After hesitating for a while, she suddenly gritted her teeth and said, answering old madam, I've long burned the sachet. Burned. Old madam sneered and didn't believe it, for who are you hiding it? Originally, concubine Yun was desperate and turned to any doctor one can find when critically ill. When she caught some fault, she wanted to use it to threaten Xu Huan. However, in the morning she, was refuted by her, sh. When she, thought about the matter from the beginning, she found out that she was indeed wrong. Or better said, she was wrong for taking that. Nothing can affect me. Attitude of Xu Huan as her, ignorance and innocence about worldly matters. Only now did she realize that the one who was the most ignorant was herself. She wouldn't get anything well from handing the sachet over. So, she forced herself to insist. Yen was afraid that if Yen carry it with me and by chance, Yen loses it or the maid saw it, it wouldn't be good. To avoid taking any chances, Yen burned it. You, old madam slammed her hand on the table. She pointed at her, and was so angry that she couldn't speak. After panting for a while, she looked at Xu Huan with anger and said sickly, is that sachet really personally made by you and you had given it to someone? Old madam seemed to be very clear about the ins and outs of the matter. This was difficult for Xu Huan. She obviously didn't do anything, so she was not willing to admit to it. However, if she denied it, others already thought that she did it and would only see her denial as having a guilty conscience. So, she said, old madam knows that my maiden family is poor. Before I married, I had to do needlework every day to sell in exchange for rice. The clothes and number of sachets that I made over the years are countless. I truly don't remember whether I have done that one or not, and I have also never given such a thing to another. Old madam glared at her and spit out 2 words, all excuses. Xu Huan no longer spoke and just faced her undisturbedly. No matter whether the sachet had been really burned or not, but since concubine Yun said that it had been burned, it was impossible to take it out. Without the sachet to verify, everything was just speculation. There was no evidence. When old madam saw that she, was looking at her in the eyes, although she was annoyed that she, was rude, but the strange thing was that her anger lessened. She asked her, is it a truth that you learned how to read from that scholar? Xu Huan stabilized her mind and quickly recalled what Gu Shiran had told her about the original owner's background. She nodded and said, he often brought clothes to wash. Sometimes, when I was idle, he would teach me a few words. When I know how to read, I can embroider some words and verses on the embroidery. Those were well liked by the literary people. I could also sell them at a higher price. If it wasn't because of this, how would my mother let me learn how to read? Even if such speculation wasn't the truth, but it shouldn't be far from the facts. Old madam didn't know about her background so well as Gu Shiran, but she also knew a lot. After she carefully listened to her explanation, she was silent for a moment. She couldn't find a loophole, and instead Xu Huan seemed very undisturbed. She could only say coldly, when a man and woman are alone together, who knows what will happen? This question was different from the last time. Before, she'd accidentally caused a fire and felt remorseful. This time, she felt that she hadn't done anything wrong. She didn't feel that she was at a loss at all. Hence, Xu Huan didn't dodge her gaze, straightened her spine and said, old madam, forgive me for being rude. Although, I was born in a poor family, but I also know sense of propriety, justice, integrity and honor. Besides, I learned how to read and know some principles. I would absolutely not do anything that could shame the family. Moreover, the teaching matter happened a few years ago. I was young and didn't get my hairpin ceremony yet. What could children do together? Old madam was rendered speechless by her. She furiously said, then, why did you still gift someone an embroidery with mandarin ducks playing in the water embroidered on it? After you learned how to read, didn't you know what a pair of mandarin ducks meant? This question was asked very strictly. Concubine Yun's face turned white and she secretly pulled Shu Huan's sleeve to let her not speak anymore. Who would have thought that Shu Huan also got angry? She felt that this old madam liked to put a basin of feces above her head. She didn't care about Concubine Yun's dissuasion and said in a clear voice, "Old madam, I already said before that it is still unknown whether that sachet was made by me or not. Moreover, I haven't given such a thing to anyone. If old madam doesn't believe me, no matter who you find to confront me, I will still say this." This time she took a bet. Just by the secretive way old madam asked them to come for the interrogation, she didn't believe that this matter could get out and that she, Own, would find someone to confront her, sh. Even if she had to confront someone, she wasn't afraid. The sachet was gone. It would only be a verbal argument. Old madam seemed to have the habit of smashing the teacups. She grabbed the tea-cup on the table and smashed it at her. She didn't dodge and also didn't have the time to dodge. However, old madam's sight wasn't good. The teacup still didn't touch her and landed on Concubine Yun instead. The tea inside the cup splashed on her. Fortunately, it wasn't newly brewed tea. It was already cold, so she didn't have to be concerned about burns. Concubine Yun was shocked by this. Tears were already welling up in her eyes. Old madam glanced at her with disgust. "What are you feeling wronged for? Wasn't this caused by you?" While talking, she turned to Shu Huan and interrogated her in a stern voice. "I will first put down the matter of the sachet. Is your morning sickness real or fake?" Even this matter had been spread. It turned out that old madam cared the most about this. She was afraid that she, already had a relationship before she married and would add a bastard to Gu family. It was clearly a very serious question. If the answer was not good, she would suffer. However, Shu Huan didn't know why, she felt relieved. She smiled slightly and said, "There is no such a thing. If old madam doesn't believe me, old madam can call a doctor to check my pulse." Chapter 32. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Condemning old madam's gaze swept majestically and fiercely over Shu Huan's face for a while. Once upon a time, when she was in charge of the family business, every time when she used this kind of gaze to explore those keepers, she would see loopholes from those who had a guilty conscience. This time, she couldn't see anything from Shu Huan's eyes. Concubine Yun said with her head lowered, "Old madam, that matter was a misunderstanding." Misunderstanding. Old madam was still suspicious, slammed the table and said, "First, it was that they couldn't summon the handkerchief of consummation. Then, it was the matter of the sachet. Everything is explained with just the word misunderstanding. Perhaps, she committed suicide by hanging on the wedding night for this love affair. If one wants to condemn somebody, don't worry about the pretext." Shu Huan was already too tired to justify herself just because this old madam didn't listen. No matter how she justified herself, it was all in vain. She could only take a sideway and stake all in one gamble. Since old madam doesn't believe me and also isn't willing to summon people to ask question or willing to find a doctor to check my pulse, then, even if I have 100 mouths, I can't argue. While talking, she kowtowed at old madam. "Although I was born in a poor family, I also know the importance of chasteness. I don't want to bear this kind of injustice about me not being chaste. I also don't want to damage Gu family's reputation because of this. Old madam, please forgive me for being unfilial and don't have the blessing to serve you in this lifetime. Perhaps in the next life, I will have the blessing to be happy under your wing." After having spoken that, she took the opportunity of getting up after she kowtowed to pick up a broken porcelain from the ground. She bit her lips and slashed her wrist. It happened so fast that the others couldn't stop her. The blood ran through the wound and dripped on the ground. Concubine Yun screamed and quickly grabbed the broken porcelain from her hand to prevent her from cutting herself again. Even old madam was shocked. She got up from the chair with the help of her cane. She didn't go see her injury first, but shouted, "Come. Get a doctor. get a doctor. The maids had all been sent out. Naturally, no one answered her when she shouted, and concubine Yun was looking after Shu Huan. She, wasn't free. She, got anxious and flew to the door herself, opened it and called the people. Unexpectedly, concubine Yun was so flustered that she tore off her clothes for a long time, but still couldn't tear anything off to wrap the wound. When she looked at Shu Huan again, she had already fainted. She, got anxious and was more flustered. Just then, a figure suddenly rushed in from the outside and shouted to her in a low voice, "Out of the way." Concubine Yun was startled. She raised her eyes and was astounded. "Second young master." Gu Shiran used force to tear a part of his clothes. While he wrapped the wound, he didn't even raise his head and said, "Let someone go bring Dr. Ji and let fourth young master help old madam inside. As for those maids, let them go back to their room. They aren't allowed to set a foot out of this yard for a while." Concubine Yun was still flustered but complied instantly. When she was about to go out, she saw Gu Shiran grab Shu Huan's neck. Another hand was on her leg. He tried to carry her. Concubine Yun couldn't help but stop him. "Second young master, quickly put her down. Your body." Gu Shiran gave her a look. "Quickly go." The voice wasn't high, but the tone was so imposing that one couldn't question further. Concubine Yun no longer hesitated. She lifted her skirt and quickly ran. Gu Shiran carried Shu Huan. He looked around the room and went to the inner room. He found a bed to put her on. He didn't expect that when he looked down, he saw that she had her eyes slightly open and was quietly looking at him. His face couldn't help but sink. For the first time, he got angry with her. "Is it very fun?" At this time, there was no one else inside the room aside from the two of them. Shu Huan didn't have to pretend to faint anymore. She bit her lips, frowned and complained, "Fun, my ass. It's so painful." He had guessed that perhaps she used the trick of injuring herself to gain the enemy's sympathy, but he still got nervous. Only now when he saw that she was fine, did he feel relieved. He dropped her lightly on the bed and flicked her forehead. "Don't curse." Shu Huan was really dejected. How could there be such a person? She was already injured and he was still so violent towards her. Gu Shiran sat on the edge of the bed. He untied the cloth he messily wrapped just now and looked at the wound. Very well, the wound wasn't deep. The bleeding almost stopped. In fact, even if he didn't wrap it, there would be no problem. However, he still re-wrapped that cloth. Shu Huan sucked her breath and shouted at him to be gentler. "You know that it will hurt and you still cut yourself." Gu Shiran looked at her like he was looking at an idiot. "Do you think I wanted to?" That he could appear here now meant that he already knew what had happened. Shu Huan also didn't hide it from him and said helplessly, "Old madam had a knot in her heart, that was why she dislikes me." The matter of this time was bigger. She linked all the things that I had done and hadn't done together. The most unfortunate thing was that these matters really could be linked together. Then, she interrogated me using them. She didn't listen to my explanation. Even if she listened, she wouldn't believe me. What can I do? Instead of letting her continue to be suspicious and knock me with them every few days, I may as well cut my wrist first to show my true feelings. At the very least, I could control the depth and the force, right? Gu Shiran said helplessly, "Have you never heard about playing with fire? If by chance you couldn't control it well and really killed yourself, then what? How could that be?" Shu Huan lowered her voice and said, "Have you ever seen someone die when they cut their wrist in front of people?" Gu Shiran clenched his teeth and said unhappily, "If old madam really didn't care whether you lived or died and set her heart on not saving you, then you will die for sure." Seeing his angry expression, Shu Huan's mood suddenly turned for the better. She laughed and said fawningly, "Then, isn't there still you who would save me?" Gu Shiran raised an eyebrow and revealed a smile that was not yet a smile. you are so sure? Xu Huan's heart skipped a beat. She raised her eyes and looked at him and then looked the other way without answering him. Originally, she wasn't sure. However, now he appeared. It would be weird if she wasn't sure. But then again, when she cut her wrist, she took into account that old madam was old and believed in Buddha. Even if she hated her, she would not let her, die in front of her. Moreover, old madam was a widow herself. She presumably put a lot of importance to the concept of being faithful to the death in memory of her husband. It was suicide again. The original owner made a big mistake by committing suicide by hanging on the wedding night. She cut her wrist to show her innocence, may be seen as her wanting to show her indomitable chasteness. Even if she was so hard-hearted to not save her, how would she die from cutting so shallow? At most, she would be a bit shameless, stand up and walk out. The limit was just that old madam would let Gu Shiran divorce her. It would be the same result as when she couldn't explain those unclear things. Anyway, it wouldn't be worse. While she was in deep thoughts, she heard the sound of the cane outside. There was also Gu Shiha who shouted, "Second big brother, where are you? Lie down." Gu Shiran quietly uttered these two words. Then, he took the blanket and covered her injured hand with it. Xu Huan lay straight, closed her eyes and pretended to be unconscious. After a while, old madam came in supported by Gu Shiha. When she saw them, she quickly asked, "How is she? Is the wound serious?" Gu Shiran quickly stood up, lowered his eyes and showed a sorrowful look. "The wound is a bit deep. We have to wait till the doctor arrived to know." When old madam heard that, she immediately prayed to Buddha. She changed to a lamenting and sorrowful tone, "I only looked for this child to ask a few questions. Who knew that she was so hot-tempered? She actually demonstrated her sincerity by dying. If something really happens, then wouldn't it be my sin?" While talking, she walked to the bed to look at Xu Huan. However, how could she see clearly under the lights? She only saw that she, had her eyes closed, her brows frowned, and she looked to be in much pain. She couldn't help but roll the beads in her hand a few times and prayed to Buddha again, sighing non-stop. Chapter 33. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Nothing to discuss regarding kissing you. In fact, things didn't have to reach this point. Xu Huan, who was lying on bed with her eyes closed and who was pretending to have fainted, regretted her actions a bit after she'd calmed down. Not to mention, the ancient teaching was that one's body belonged to their parents, but it was also not appropriate to harm her own body. But, occasionally, she couldn't help herself and acted a bit too impulsive, overriding her reasoning. She couldn't explain things properly when old madam had interrogated her just because the story behind the interrogation was the original owner's love story. How could one explain love clearly? She didn't know the story, couldn't explain it and couldn't make others believe her explanation. Hence, she decided to use such a stupid way to solve the problem at hand. Now, she felt that fighting and scheming against each other was really tiring. In any case, she hoped that the pain this time could be exchanged for a relatively stable and calm life in the future. She didn't want to continue living under the suspicion of others. She didn't want to see old madam's cold eyes glancing at her with doubt every time she went to pay her respects. She didn't want to bear those crimes that originally didn't belong to her. When Dr. Ji arrived, the people inside the room scattered and only Gu Shiran was left. Xu Huan suddenly felt something cool placed on her wrist. It seemed that her wrist was covered with a silk pad. She couldn't help but slightly open her eyes. When she saw that Dr. Ji frowned and put his finger on her wrist, she quickly closed her eyes. After a while, Gu Shiran's low and magnetic voice could be heard, "How is she?" Dr. Ji didn't answer. He was busily looking at Xu Huan's wound. He applied a medicinal powder on it and then carefully wrapped it. Gu Shiran couldn't hold back and asked, "No need to stitch it." This time, Dr. Ji gently replied, "It's only a slight injury." It's not so serious. She just needs to change medicine every day and avoid water. After a few days, it would form scabs and heal. If you are afraid that it would leave a scar, apply this cream. The scar would fade after a few months. Gu Shiran took over Dr. G's cream and faked 2 coughs. Dr. G, take a look again. I think that my wife is very badly injured. That tone seemed to hint something. The room immediately turned quiet. After a long time, did she heard the gentle and clear voice of Dr. G again. This little one checked carefully and feels that your wife's wound is indeed very serious. Is it that she lost too much blood? The artery had been injured. If I was a bit later, then she couldn't have been saved. Then, does she have to stay in bed to recuperate for a while? Yes, she needs to stay in bed to recuperate for a while. Is it necessary to eat more nourishing things? Bird nest and ginseng are indispensable. Xu Huan almost laughed out loudly when she listened to their deadpan question and answer. She had to tell them that she almost got an internal injury. Although, she wouldn't be able to hide the fact that she faked her fainting from a doctor, but if she laughed out loudly now, it would be very embarrassing. Fortunately, Gu Shiran continued to say, then, Dr. G, please come with me to report to old madam to let her rest assured. Although my wife is badly injured, but there was nothing to worry about her life. Dr. G carried his medicinal coffer and readily followed good advice. Please, go first. The 2 men walked out together. Only now did Xu Huan sigh gentle, opened her eyes and revealed a helpless smile. This trick of injuring oneself to gain the enemy's confidence was really not easy to act. If it wasn't because there was Gu Shiran who collaborated with her, it would be very easy to see through. She didn't know what Dr. G reported back to old madam and if he had clarified the rumors about her morning sickness. Anyway, when she slowly woke up, old madam was looking quite kindly at her and also asked whether she wanted to stay at Pine Crane Hall tonight. The answer was of course not. She didn't want to face this old madam on edge and be afraid that she would reveal loopholes. Of course what she said was very tactful. She said she didn't want to disturb old madam's rest and to let her forgive her offend. For the first time, she saw old madam reveal a faintly discernible smile at her. When she went to Pine Crane Hall, she walked perfectly fine. Now, that she had to go back to Plum Flower Pavilion, she was being carried back. Concubine Yun supported Gu Shiran at a side. After every 2 steps, he would take a breath. He played the role of the weak and the ill very well. There was no other way. He had rushed into Pine Crane Hall in a hurry and also carried Xu Huan to the bed. Now, after the incident, he was afraid that old madam would become suspicious after recalling the event. So, after Dr. G saw the injured Xu Huan, he, GXR, had been like as if he was on the verge of collapsing after exerting too much strength in a moment of desperation. This made old madam worry and let Dr. G also check his pulse and prescribe medication before she was willing to let him go. Xu Huan thought it was very funny. She didn't know whether that Dr. G would think that this husband and wife were very strange. They were obviously very well but had to pretend to be seriously ill to muddle people. When they returned to Plum Flower Pavilion, Gu Shiran used the excuse that he was tired to send concubine Yun and the maids out. He closed the door and even locked it. Then, he turned and glared unkindly at Xu Huan who was laying in bed. This couldn't be. Didn't he already teach her a lesson at old madam's? Could it be that he wanted to do it again? Xu Huan forced a smile and moved her body to the side of the wall. Gu Shiran originally didn't want to throw a temper, but at this moment, when things had calmed down, he got angrier the more he thought about it. In particular when he returned to the hall with Dr. G and saw the blood on the ground that hadn't been washed away yet. He felt an inexplicable fluster that instantly caught his heart. The atmosphere wasn't right. Seeing him getting close to the bed, Xu Huan suddenly felt that she was a small white rabbit who had encountered a big gray wolf. Her heartbeat panicked. She couldn't help but ask, what do you want to do? Gu Shiran came even closer to her and retorted, what do you think? I'm sick now. The meaning was that she needed to be treated gently. Gu Shiran licked his lips and said, that is self-harm. You can't blame anyone. I was forced. The tone turned unhappier, weren't you sure that I will go save you? Why didn't you wait? Shu Huan wanted to explain, but she had already been pulled into his embrace. She didn't even react yet, when his lips crushed hers. That was a kiss with anger and punishment and couldn't be tolerated to be refused. First, it fiercely smothered her lips and then it entangled with them. Among the pain, there was the smell of blood spreading and there was also a sense of suffocation that was unclear whether it came from happiness or pain. The two's body came closer. So close that Shu Huan felt her heart almost jumped out of her chest. The instinctive reaction of the body had driven away her reason. She had long been unable to think. She could only feel the heat coming from Gu Shiran's body. It was like flames that could burn everything. It wrapped around her and made her also burn with it. The recklessly tossing about in bed became lingering. Gu Shiran's kiss became gentler, but in comparison, the breathing became heavier. Until when he almost went over the edge of self-control, he suddenly moved his face away and buried himself in her neck. He panted and tried to calm down his emotions. After a while, Shu Huan reached out to push him. Gu Shiran raised his face and saw that under the light, her cheeks were red like peach blossoms and that her eyes were full of ripples of water. He couldn't help but reach out to touch her slightly swollen lips. He warned her, this time, it's just a slight punishment. If next time you do something as stupid, it would not only be like this. His voice was low and hoarse. It sounded dangerous and tempting. Answering him was Shu Huan's faint smile. She smiled because he once again lost his mind and her vigilance had been thrown away. Shu Huan opened her mouth slightly and sucked his finger. She didn't wait for him to react and fiercely bite on it. Gu Shiran humped from pain and quickly pulled his finger back. Shu Huan became hostile and said with anger, lecher. Pervert. You actually dared to attack sneakily. Gu Shiran lowered his body and laid next to her. He reached a finger out to her hair that was scattered around the pillow. He smiled slightly and said, then, should I inform you first next time? Chapter 34 You are listening at novelfull.audio. The birthday marriage was a very complicated and troublesome thing. Engagement, preparing the dowry, ritual kneeling, wedding night. This was a road every girl must walk on when they reach adulthood. The pity was that Shu Huan had experienced none of it. When she woke up, it was already the next day of the wedding. She still maintained a girl's mentality and a virgin body. She had never experienced the joy of being married, so how could she have the consciousness of being someone's wife? Hence, although she slept in the same bed with Gu Shiran, she didn't feel that they were husband and wife. Seeing that he was playing with her hair, she pulled that strand of hair back and also drew a line with her finger from the top of the bed to the bottom. You're not allowed to cross the line. If you come to my side of the bed again in the middle of the night, I will kick you out of bed. When she was kissed by force, she didn't have a choice. Even if she cried and caused a fuss, it wouldn't change the fact. So, Shu Huan decided to forget about it and put her attention on things that needed more protection. However, although her tone was bold and confident, her heart was timid. She didn't repel Gu Shiran. She repelled Gu household. There was constant trouble and everywhere was full of schemes and tricks. For this reason, she was afraid that if she was attacked a few more times sneakily, raw rice will turn cooked by accident. Then, she would be like a bird whose wings was pulled, be trapped in a cage and could no longer fly away. Helplessly, the one she met was someone who was unmoved by force or persuasion. At this time, he was looking at her with a very gentle gaze. He smiled slightly and said, I won't mind if you cross the line. I won't kick you out of bed. She couldn't win him with words alone. Every time they had a verbal confrontation, she'd lose. Xu Huan turned her face away and changed the subject. Did you foresee the incident? How come you appeared just in time? I let Shiha inquire for me. He came back and told me that it was the matter of the sachet and that old madam was very angry. I knew then that things didn't look good. Speaking till here, Gu Shiran's expression changed slightly. He said helplessly, if you persisted a bit more, I would have arrived. Xu Huan muttered, what use does it have? Even if you help me on this matter, it couldn't be explained clearly. Gu Shiran's gaze swept once over her, do you think I'm stupid like you? All right, she is stupid. Changing the topic again, she said dejectedly, don't you have anything to ask me about the sachet? I have. Gu Shiran laughed. Find another day to make one for me. She didn't know how to. They talked a bit more when Xu Huan began to yawn. In the end, the room turned quiet. When Gu Shiran looked at her, he discovered that she'd actually fallen asleep while hugging the blanket. He couldn't help but think that it was funny. He reached out and stroked her hair as tenderness swelled in his heart. Speaking of it, what happened today was really enough to torment her. Plus the fact that she tossed and turned last night, she didn't seem to have slept much. Presumably, that was why she would be tired like this. While thinking, his hand couldn't help but circle around her waist. He fell asleep peacefully like this with her in his arms. The next morning, when Xu Huan woke up, she found out that her trick of injuring herself to get the enemy's sympathy worked. Zissou came with old madam's two other maids. They moved a pile of nourishing food over like bird nest, ginseng, white fungus, and bearded tooth mushroom. They piled up everything on the table and smiled at the couple before paying their respects. Then, they kowtowed to Gu Shiran and wished him happy birthday. They gave him 2 sets of clothes, a pair of jade and a talisman of peace and safety that old madam had sent over. After that, they reported, old madam said that second young mistress doesn't have to go over to pay your respect these 2 months. It's enough if you peacefully and safely take care of your body. If you need something, you can just send someone over to get it. While talking, Zissou turned to concubine Yun, old madam asked this slave to be the messenger. Concubine Yun, don't blame me. Obviously, it wasn't a good message. Concubine Yun smiled and nodded. Zissou said, old madam said that concubine should be more well-behaved. It's good if you manage your own affairs well. You should worry less about other things. If concubine couldn't do it, then old madam will ask you to go over to accompany her to pray to Buddha and cultivate spiritually. The words weren't too harsh, but the hidden warning was stated in the presence of so many people. While concubine Yun promised to do it, her eyes couldn't help but get red. She also regretted it very much. After the trouble, no one got something good out of it. Why did she have to go through so much trouble? However, she also knew that she was lucky to not have been punished. This was because old madam didn't want the matter to escalate. Moreover, second young mistress already became ill and this plum flower pavilion couldn't be left unattended. Otherwise, old madam may have not spared her so easily. After Zissou passed on the message, she left. She'd just left but Xiaoyun had caught up to her and secretly asked her, big sister Zissou, what had happened last night. I saw that second young mistress was carried back and even second young master seemed to be angry. This made my heart feel uneasy, bnoel.m because Xiaoyun always sweet-talked her and Zissou had a good relationship with her. She looked around, shook her head and whispered, you shouldn't ask about this. It's best if you don't mention it. Even we didn't know what happened exactly. Old madam also commanded that no one was allowed to talk a word more about it. Otherwise, you will be hit 20 times with the wooden board and be sent out of the residence. So serious. Xiaoyun didn't dare to ask more. She just watched Zissou go back with the others. Later, she also didn't have time to think about it. Today was Gu Shiran's birthday. Every yard sent people to wish him a happy birthday and sent things over. The whole morning was chaotic. The maids were so busy that their feet didn't even touch the ground. How could she still have time to gossip? Perhaps it was because old Madam issued a command to not speak about it. There were only a few people who knew what had happened last night. Even if some people heard a bit about it, they only knew that after Shu Huan went to Pine Crane Hall, she came back looking ill. They didn't know what really happened. Therefore, everyone pretended they didn't know anything and no one came to visit the sick. Perhaps, something good came from the disaster. Shu Huan became the idlest person on this busy day. She didn't even get out of bed to wash up. The food was also brought to the room. It could be considered that she got some quietness. However, she also had some troubles. She didn't know when she had to give that carved wonderful redwood of Inga to Gu Shiran. Moreover, she knew that her carving wasn't brilliant. The thing she engraved was also strange. She was afraid that she would be made fun of by him. She delayed like this. That waist pendant had already become warm due to her rubbing it between her hands. She saw Gu Shiran come in from the outer hall with his hand on his temples. Seeing his unhappy face, Shu Huan laughed, "It's so lively outside, why are you not happy?" Gu Shiran pointed out, "Noisy. Headache. Then, you should rest for a moment. Later, when old Madam sends the birthday banquet over, perhaps your siblings will come over." While talking, Shu Huan delivered the waist pendant cheekily and nonchalantly. Who would have thought that concubine Yun would raise the curtain now, come in and report, eldest young mistress sent maid Shixiang over with gifts. She also said that she originally wanted to come over personally, but unfortunately master and eldest young master had returned. She didn't have time and asked for second young master to not blame her. This was a little unexpected. Gu Shitian went with his father Guda to buy ingredients to make fragrances. It had been a while that he learned about doing business. A few days ago he sent a letter to say that he would return in a month or so. Unexpectedly, he suddenly returned today. Thinking for a moment with his eyes lowered, Gu Shiran said to Shu Huan, "Rest first. I will go take a look and will come back after I paid my respect." Gu Shiran had to go pay his respect. This was nothing strange to Shu Huan, but to concubine Yun, this was the first time she saw this after having entered the household. But with what had happened last night in Pine Crane Hall, she didn't show anything on her face although she was surprised. She just looked once with complicated feelings at Shu Huan. She already realized that second young master truly treat this newly taken second young mistress well. Although his body had gradually improved these days, he still didn't let people know. Even just now, he still pretended to be ill when he received the people. Now, he wanted to go pay his respect was, of course, to tell the elders that even if he wasn't completely healed yet, his complexion and spirit was much better than before. This was all the credit of second young mistress after she'd married in hope that the great event of joy would drive away his bad luck and hasten his recovery and because she served him well. This was to tell everyone to not treat second young mistress lightly or badly. Perhaps, there was also the warning that she had to be more respectful to second young mistress in the future. He actually protected her like this. While thinking, concubine Yun felt more sour and sorrowful in her heart. However, after being taught a lesson, she didn't dare to be disrespectful anymore. She quickly smiled to cover up her feelings and went to take out clothes that Gu Shiran needed to wear when going to see the elders. Chapter 35. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Going out. When Gu Shiran returned, 3 small tails followed behind him. Gu Shiha, Ranmo, and Dian walked in a line behind him. Shu Huan was surprised, "Why did you come in?" After having adapted here for a few days, she knew that the contact between men and women in ancient times were quite strict. However, study companions, such as Ranmo and Dian, could still enter and exit through the second door. But, coming all the way to the bedroom didn't seem that appropriate. After she'd asked this, Gu Shiha also shamelessly asked, "Why did you follow?" Ranmo took 2 steps back and bitterly replied, "Didn't master let this little one follow you?" Gu Shihe then said with a dissatisfied look on his face, "Then, did this master let you follow all the way to the bedroom? Get out! Get out!" After that, he raised his eyes and saw that Gu Shiran was looking at him with a smile that was not yet a smile. His heart couldn't help but feel scared. He didn't realize yet what he had done wrong when he heard him calmly say, "You also go out." What the hell? He was only 10 years old. Did he, have to be wary of Shu Huan to avoid suspicions? But somehow, Gu Shihe instinctively seemed to fear this second big brother, so he humped once and went to the outer hall with the 2 study companions. When Shu Huan saw this, she couldn't help but laugh. The depression of not being able to get out of the room also lessened a lot. Who would have thought that Gu Shiran handed her a set of clothes and said concisely, "Change." Why? Shu Huan was puzzled. "Take you out for a walk." Ah. It was too sudden. Shu Huan was a bit surprised. She looked at the clothes in her hand. It was clearly the style that the male servants used to wear, so she was even more surprised. "This set of clothes is Diane's. I saw that his size was the same as yours. So, I asked him for it. Don't worry, it was made a few days ago. He hasn't worn it yet." Shu Huan wasn't worried about this but wondered why Gu Shiran wanted to take her out for a walk after just having returned from paying his respect. Moreover, he openly let her disguise as a man. Seeing that she was in a daze and didn't move, Gu Shiran frowned and said, "What? You don't want to go? Or is it that your injury?" "No, no." Shu Huan quickly shook her head. "My injury is all right. As long as I don't touch it, I won't feel any pain at all." In fact, she was nearly crazy from boredom after having stayed in this yard for the whole day. She had long wanted to take a walk outside to see the world and also understand the situation here. It was just, under such circumstances, was it appropriate to go out? Not to mention the troubles, if word of this reached old Madam and she got to know that her suicide attempt was fake, then the consequences would be absolutely terrible. The desire to go out clashed with her cautiousness. After some hesitation, Shu Huan decided to leave her concerns behind. Wasn't there Gu Shiran here? He was a thoughtful person. What she could think of, he would certainly be able to think of. Since he didn't care about it meant that he had long prepared an excuse. She should believe him. Choosing to trust him unconditionally was just an instinctive intuition. She couldn't explain why, and she didn't even realize this problem. She only shook the clothes in her hand and then suddenly flashed a flattering smile at Gu Shiran, that, "Can you go out for a moment?" The fortunes rise and fall. Gu Shiran looked at her with a funny smile and then went out. After she changed, Shu Huan was in trouble when she had to do her hair. From a certain angle, doing a hairstyle looked very simple. However, it was impossible to let her, who used to have short hair that needed almost no combing, do it herself. She could only call Gu Shiran in to discuss. "You don't know how to." The gaze that Gu Shiran used to stare at her was full of amusement. However, he didn't ask more and called Concubine Yun in. When Concubine Yun came in and saw the way Shu Huan was dressed, her eyes widened more than usual. She stuttered, "Second young mistress. You this. Don't ask me. Ask him." Shu Huan sat down leisurely in front of the dressing table. She shamelessly passed the trouble of explaining to Gu Shiran. Gu Shiran didn't have any unusual reaction. He said directly, "Comb her hair for her. I want to go out with her." "Go out?" Concubine Yun's eyes widened even more. She was completely shocked. "Second young master, this doesn't seem very good. Second young mistress just got injured yesterday. Moreover." Gu Shiran raised his hand to stop her, "Just do as I said." Concubine Yun looked at him and then looked at Shu Huan. She sighed helplessly. She reached out for an ebony comb on the dressing table and combed Shu Huan's hair. Shu Huan had to say that combing hair was also a knowledge. Compared to Huiyan's gentleness, concubine Yun's gesture was slightly less gentle, but she would never make the scalp feel painful. When she, combed, it would be tight and not easy to loosen. In only a short time, Shu Huan changed into a handsome study companion. What do you think? Shu Huan was a bit perturbed. She didn't know whether this appearance could deceive people. Gu Shiran swept once over her and said, acceptable. What does acceptable mean? So unconvincing. Shu Huan picked up the bronze mirror. It was actually quite good. She was still young and her body wasn't fully developed yet. It was appropriate to act as a study companion. She looked refreshing and neat. If she wore those long robes of Gu Shiran, they wouldn't fit her height. She wouldn't look good in them. Somehow, her mood suddenly brightened. She put down the bronze mirror and said, let's go. She couldn't wait to fly out of this stuffy residence to go see the outside world. Concubine Yun was still uneasy. What should I do if someone comes to wish second young master happy birthday, or if old madam and madam send someone over? Gu Shiran smiled. Master and eldest young master returned. They are busy setting up a wash the dust banquet. Will there be anyone who would still come here? He was telling the truth. Concubine Yun couldn't help but feel sad for him. Then, she looked at Shu Huan and sighed in her heart. If he got well sooner, perhaps he could have taken a wife from a well-matched family. Then, Plum Flower Pavilion wouldn't be so deserted. However, it would be difficult to say whether her situation would be worse if that happened. After all, this second young mistress was still kind. While she was in deep thoughts, Gu Shiran went on to say, if someone really comes, then, say that I went out for a walk. Second young mistress is ill and won't see anyone. Sent them all back. And, after we leave, no one is allowed to enter this room. If someone leaves the yard, find someone appropriate to follow. Are you clear on what to do next? This. Concubine Yun was distracted and nodded. I will entrust here to you. If the outside gets any wind of this, I will look for you. While saying this, Gu Shiran's face had a calm and collected smile. It looked like he was telling a joke. However, Concubine Yun's heart tightened and she immediately knew that this was a warning and a reminder. She couldn't help but smile bitterly. Since when did second young master begin to not even trust her? But who could she blame for this? She had to carry the effect of the cause that she'd caused herself. Even with bitterness in her heart, she still complied. Second young master can rest assured. Gu Shiran nodded and raised an eyebrow when looking at Shu Huan, who was just listening to them at a side. He said, let's go. Chapter 36. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Jingtian City. When seeing Shu Huan's appearance as a study companion, the eyes of the three people who were waiting in the outer hall also widened. The two study companions still knew the rules. After being stunned for a moment, they quickly lowered their heads. Gu Shiha didn't have so many scruples. He walked 2 rounds around her. After looking and looking, he laughed wickedly and said, you look good when pretending to be a study companion. Shu Huan laughed and said, thank you for the praise. Just when Gu Shiha wanted to pretend to be polite and say something back, he saw the gaze that Gu Shiran swept over him and immediately retrieved his speech in a well-behaved manner. He didn't know why he was so afraid of his second big brother. One had to know that he had never acted so well-behaved in front of master. Perhaps it wasn't fear. Now, the aura that second big brother revealed at every gesture made him, feel involuntarily intimidated. Gu Shiran didn't know what he was thinking in his little head. He only commanded Dian, go inside the room and don't come out. Dian went blank. Second young master, should this little one change my appearance to look like second young mistress? Gu Shiran laughed, no need. While talking, he ordered concubine Yun to send his meal inside the room when it was time to eat. Concubine Yun complied. Gu Shihe couldn't wait any longer and urged them to go quickly. Gu Shiran looked inside the yard. Only Liangchen and Mei Jing were watering the flowers and feeding the birds. He reached out and gently pressed Xu Huan's head down, "Follow Ranmo." A group of 4 people went out openly like this. Behind them, Mei Jing wondered, why is second young master going out again after having just returned? Liangchen said heedlessly, "Didn't you see that 4th young master followed behind him?" Perhaps, 4th young master came up with a fresh idea and pestered 2nd young master to take him out to play. Mei Jing stuck out her tongue and said, "It's a good thing that 2nd young master seemed to be getting better these days, or else he would have been annoyed to death by 4th young master already." Naturally, Gu Shihe didn't hear the conversation between the maids. He only sneezed twice. Xu Huan couldn't help but ask, "Caught a cold?" Gu Shihe answered, a bit annoyed, "My nose is itchy." "Isn't this all because of you? I had to go through a dog hole. Maybe it was some dog hairs. I sneezed the whole night." "Ah. Go through a dog hole." That was right, the entrance of Pine Crane Hall had been locked last night. If one wanted to go inquire about information, they had to go through a dog hole. He was probably allergic to this kind of hairs. That was why he kept sneezing. Knowing that Gu Shihe was someone who cared about face, Xu Huan tried very hard not to laugh out loudly. She saw that he looked at her from the top to the bottom and laughed evilly. "I didn't expect that second sister. Law also had some means. You were able to even keep old madam in the dark." Xu Huan was very embarrassed about this. She could only lower her head and ignored him. Gu Shiran coughed once, asking so much. "Didn't you finish yet?" Gu Shihe immediately went silent and kicked Ranmo, who was silently laughing at aside. It was a big deal that master and eldest young master had returned. On the way, the yards were deserted. They didn't see a lot of people. Presumably, everyone went over to please them. Gu Shihe was someone who couldn't stand silence. After a while, his enthusiasm waned and said, "At home, there are only people who want to curry favor. I have not seen others go to second big brother to wish him happy birthday." When eldest big brother returned, everyone flocked over like flies. As he said that, he kicked a small stone on the ground. Even if a little kid knew what curry favor was, his feelings towards it wouldn't be deep since he had been spoiled since young. Seeing his sulky expression, Xu Huan felt that he was more jealous than feeling unjust for Gu Shiran. Gu Shiran must have also thought it was like that. He didn't care about him, gxh. Gu Shiran rarely went out Plum Flower Pavilion. Those on the outside didn't recognize him. Even when they reached the door at the corner, the 2 doorkeepers were still chatting. Finally, when they saw Gu Shihe, they hurriedly stood up and was particularly attentive towards him. Their bootlick made Gu Shihe very comfortable. His face showed a rare smile. He then took a small piece of silver from his purse and threw it over, "Your reward." A truly haughty manner of an arrogant master. It pleased the 2 doorkeepers so much that they repeatedly bowed their head and said thanks. Xu Huan and Gu Shiran exchanged a glance. They couldn't help but laugh. They just talked about currying favor and then they saw such a scene. There was a lively street not far away from Gu residence. Therefore, they didn't ride a horse or a carriage and walked over. Not to mention Xu Huan, but even Gu Shihe was very excited after getting out. He ran everywhere. When he saw the stalls, he had to go over to take a look. This made Ranmo, who ran behind him anxiously as he shouted, "My master, can you be a bit slower? Don't get lost." Xu Huan, who grew up in modern times, only saw a bit of the appearance of the ancient city from the map of the Qingming River. Now, Xu Huan stood on the ancient street. She was more shocked than excited. Under her feet was a flat road covered with bluestones. It extended in front of her and there seemed to be no end. On the sides were a great number of shops. They were painted in the color of nature and had red roof tiles. On the front of the door hung black shop signs with golden words. The shops were connected one to another. There were endless streams of pedestrians and carriages on the streets. There were also hawkers who walked in the streets and screamed loudly to attract customers. The prosperity wasn't inferior to modern times. Instead, there was more of an antique charm to it and a strong sense of life to it. Jingtian City. Here wasn't the center of Qi country's political power, it was just a neighboring city and already had such an imposing bearing. Xu Huan couldn't describe what she was feeling at this moment. She only felt that it was like a dream that she dreamed about 1,000 times. When she woke up, she forgot the dream and only faint dissatisfaction and frustration were left. However, she suddenly found out that she was already in the dream. Everything around here was real. For the first time, she truly felt that she had time-traveled. She didn't know whether Gu Shiran was considerate or that it was also the first time that he went out of home, his gaze was also attracted to what was in front of him. In short, he didn't speak and also didn't urge her to walk. He only stood silently at her side and accompanied her. This was only hard on the study companion Ranmo. He had to watch over Gu Shiha as he ran around and also had to urge Gu Shiran and Xu Huan to keep up with them, RGXH, to avoid being lost and he, couldn't find them, SHGXR. The most important thing was that among the four, 3 rarely went out. The only who knew the way was him, Ranmo's whole face was frowning. He frequently looked back and said bitterly, "Second young master, don't look anymore. Let's go." Only now did Gu Shiran knock Xu Huan's head and said, "Dian, let's go." It was enough that she had to pretend to be a study companion. Why did she have to also take Dian's name? Xu Huan helplessly moved along, but her gaze still fell on the shop signs on both sides of the street. She carefully read the words on them and found out that the ancient times sold a lot of things. Moreover, the classification was more finely done. Just those clothing shops alone were divided by type of clothing. There were separate shops selling scarves, cloth wrappers, belts, silk cloth, shoes and purses. Even those who sold ready-made clothes were divided into many kinds according to the material used. Although it was cumbersome, it was really convenient to buy things if you didn't count her who was purposeless and wanted to go to every shop. Chapter 37. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Pay the money. It wasn't easy to go out once. Hence, even with Ranmo's urging, Xu Huan was still bent on walking from the beginning of the street to the end. Gu Shiran didn't object and slowly followed behind her. Although in the eyes of the people, it was a bit strange to see a master follow a study companion, it wasn't a particularly outrageous thing. At most, the glances from other people would just be more teasing. The glances were a bit amorous and showing a bit that they understood what was going on. It happened that the people who were being looked at were obsessed with the different kind of things sold in the shops. They weren't aware of those gazes. The most annoying thing was that when they wanted to enter the make-up shop, they would be stopped by Gu Shiha. This was the same for the flower shop. The reason was that fourth young master had no interest in these girly things. Only when they visit shops that sold snacks and food and shops that sold toys would this difficult to serve fourth young master beam with joy. Because of this, the two had many arguments. Xu Huan said delighted, "There is a shop selling calligraphy. I want to go have a look." Gu Shiha pouted, "The whole residence is filled with those. If you want to have a look, then look when we go back. Then, there's a shop selling carvings. I can go have a look at that, right? You are so annoying. Can you eat or play with those things? I will even find them a burden after buying them. I don't care. I want to go to this shop that sells books. Books. I don't even have enough time to burn them all and you still want to buy more. Let's go, let's go, let's go. Let's go to that side. They sell magic dolls there. I won't go, I won't go. Why are you dragging me? Let go. Both of them competed for the leadership. They argued while they walked. Moreover, the more they argued, the more excited they became. That indifferent face of Gu Shiran looked a bit gloomy. He deeply realized that it was a big mistake to take them both out at the same time. He got a headache just from their arguments. Only Ranmo was quick-witted. When he saw Gu Shiran like that, he quickly went forward to please him. Second young master, all the shops on the left sell toys. I think that fourth young master and second mistress that they will be shopping for a while. Do you want to rest a bit at this shop that sells tea? Gu Shiran looked and saw that the shop that sold tea was doing quite well. The tea tables were put in front of the shop. He could sit there and enjoy tea while also monitoring the two noisy brats. Hence, he nodded. He didn't know that the tea sold on the outside was different from those used at Gu residence. When the tea owner brought a cup of tea steeped from walnuts and pine nuts, he was a bit stunned. It was still Ranmo who was afraid that he wasn't used to this kind of tea. He quickly took a small bag of tea leaves from the bag he carried. He wanted to borrow the hot water from the store owner to steep it, but he was stopped by Gu Shiran. Don't need to go through so much trouble. This tea is very good. While talking, he took a sip. The taste was a bit strange, but it wasn't unpleasant to drink. However, when he was drinking the tea, he realized that his body was really in a bad state. He had already nourished it for a while, but he still felt his legs becoming soft and he was out of breath after walking for a while. After taking 2 sips, he regained some energy. It seemed that he better walk more in the future. Ranmo took his leave and went after Gu Shiha. He sat there alone and took a look at the scene on the street. While he was at it, he also looked at Xu Huan, who was not far away, competing with Gu Shiha. A faint smile couldn't help but appear on his face. After he sat for a while, Xu Huan came back with a sulking face while Gu Shiha followed behind her with a smiling face. Gu Shiha held several clay dolls dressed in exquisite clothes. When he sat by the table, he urged the store owner to serve tea. Xu Huan also sat down, looked at Gu Shiran and said hesitantly, "Can you lend me some money? We rushed to come out. I forgot to bring." In fact, she had given her monthly payment to Xu couple. Now, she was completely bereft. Gu Shiran smiled, "What do you want to buy?" Xu Huan pointed at the clay dolls Gu Shiha was playing with. "The Double 7 festival is getting closer. I want magic dolls." This was something she heard from Gu Shiha. She got to know that on the day of the Double 7 festival, every family would build a building in their yard to put these kinds of strange clay dolls. She didn't really want to celebrate any traditional festival. She just found those dolls interesting. Not to mention that they were shaped decently, they also wore small clothes made from cotton silk. Even the hairpins and headwear were on point. The male dolls that Gu Shiha Bao held props such as guns and sticks. Some could even turn their eyes with the help of their clothes. The handwork was the best. She didn't have any other hobby. She just liked to collect such delicate handicrafts. Therefore, she asked to borrow money. Gu Shiha was playing with the clay dolls and when he heard that, he laughed, "You want this? Why didn't you say so just now?" While speaking, he generously pushed 2 magic dolls to here, "These 2 are for you." Just now, she still clamored to not go to the magic doll's shop. How could she have the face to accept them now? Even more embarrassing was borrowing money from a little brat that was much younger than her. So, she politely pushed the 2 magic dolls back at him. "No need, no need. These were chosen by you. You play with them yourself." Gu Shiran laughed, "Isn't it alright if we buy 2 more? Don't keep pushing to each other." Having said that, he stood up while his knuckles gently slammed the table. "Remember to pay after you're done having tea. We will go take a look first." Gu Shiha didn't mind. While drinking, he said, "All right," that when he finished the tea, paid and rushed to the stalls selling magic dolls. Xu Huan had already selected 7 to 8 delicate clay dolls. The owner was assembling them in a box. When Gu Shiran saw him, he took the box, handed it over to Ranmo and also said, "Pay." Gu Shiha was very easy-going in terms of money. Hearing that he, GXR, let him pay, he paid. He didn't have any complaints. However, after visiting a few shops, Xu Huan selected a jade male doll used in sideshows, a carved green jade boat and a pair of long horned grasshopper that were in a bamboo cage. Every time, the who paid had been always him. No matter how slow he was, he sensed that something wasn't right. He couldn't hold it in and asked, "Why do I have to pay every time?" Who would have thought that Gu Shiran just swept once over him and smiled slightly, when rich people go out, they don't bring money on them. It turned out that he didn't bring money. The expression of Gu Shiha immediately sank. "Didn't you promise me to take me out to play?" Gu Shiran retorted, "Didn't I bring you out to play?" That seemed to be true, but what he, GXH, was talking about was that he had to take him out to play, not to buy things in his, GXR, stead. For the first time in Gu Shiha's life, he was speechless and it happened that he couldn't throw a fit. Of course, he didn't lack money from a young age. Hence, he didn't take this matter that seriously. He wouldn't have cared if he had to continue to pay the whole way. The problem was that when they went to a jewelry store, Gu Shiran actually took out money to buy a pair of rings. Gu Shiha's eyes immediately turned big and accused, "Didn't you say that when rich people go out they wouldn't bring money?" Gu Shiran swept once more over him, "Do I look like someone rich?" That didn't seem to be wrong. Although this second big brother grew up in a rich family like him, he was ill the whole year long. The medicine was already enough cost for him. He wasn't like Big Brother who was in charge of the shops and often went out to socialize, which enabled him to pay from the common account. He, GXR, also wasn't like him who could pester old madam and madam for money. He, GXR, only had 10 silver liang to spend every month. That was only 120 silver liang a year. He was indeed not a rich man. Thinking till here, his anger lessened. He didn't expect that Gu Shiran continued without care, "Moreover, my body is so weak, ill. It was already very good that I was able to carry 2 silver liang. If I carry more, do you want to let me die from carrying 2 heavy things?" Gu Shiha was utterly defeated. Only now did he discover that illness could also be used as an excuse to not pay.